Strong Mind podcast. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started with this episode where we talk a lot about breath. First thing to mention is that if you haven't seen it already, we are about to launch a new course called Performance Hacks, which we're really excited about. And it's all about how to optimize performance by leveraging your psychology. If you're a listener of the Strong Mind podcast, then you're fully aware that what's going on in our minds, how we use our attention, and how we optimize our psychology can really make the difference between a performance where you're really distracted and you're climbing really poorly, and a performance when you're completely focused on what you're doing and you're in flow. And we know that if we want to climb the hardest routes that we can climb, whatever level of a climber that you are, that we need our mind to be focused in the moment. Yet many of us don't really know actually how to do that. There are things that we might do through trial and error or through intuition, but we spend a lot of time focused on how to train our bodies for climbing, but most of us are not as clued up when it comes to what tools, tips, and strategies we can use to leverage our psychologies for performance. The cool thing about performance psychology is that it doesn't just improve your performance. You are also more able to access the states in climbing that are most enjoyable and rich and focused. And it's likely that those states that you access, like being focused or being in flow or being in that like really try hard state, those states that you're in, they might actually be the reason why you go climbing. And if you spent the whole time distracted as a climber, it's unlikely that you would have been hooked on climbing for so long. So the cool thing about performance psychology is that not only can you improve your climbing performances and climb harder and more consistently, more reliably, but you can also just enjoy climbing more and get more out of climbing. And the other cool thing is that a lot of these skills are really transferable. So a lot of the areas around mindset and how to use your attention in the moment, they can also be used in other areas of your life as well. So all this to say that we're really excited about this course. And if you're interested, we've put together a waitlist because we're going to do a live launch of this course, which means that we'll accept a cohort of students and we'll support those students through the course over 6 weeks. And we only have a certain number of places for that live cohort. So if you're interested, definitely sign up to the waitlist because our other 2 courses that we've launched have sold out in a matter of days. And you'll be notified first as to when we open the sales. And also, we are going to be sending out over the next few weeks a lot of tips and information around performance psychology, mindset, flow state. And so through these emails, you'll be able to work out if you think this course is for you. It will just spark your interest or it might not. But you'll have a better idea of whether you want to do this course, and you'll also get first access. So definitely join the waitlist if you're at all interested, and then you can decide nearer the time whether you want to become a student or not. All right, now on to this episode. In this episode, we talk a lot about breath. We look at the physical and mental benefits of breath work from 2 different perspectives with 2 experts in the field. So I speak with 2 guests on this podcast. One is Dr. Michael Melnichuk, and the other is Dr. Sundar Balasubramanian. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that very well. And so Mike Melnichuk is a neuroscientist and a climber who has conducted seminal research on brain plasticity and how the breath and brain activity are interrelated. He has also engaged in meditation and breathing techniques since he was a child, and his scientific work is heavily influenced by his practice. He's also been a rock climber for 30 years, and he suffered a near fatal fall while free soloing. And because of that, he's actually taken a keen interest in the stuff that we're doing over at Strong Mind, where we leverage the breath and mind to manage fear while climbing. And Dr. Sundar is a cell biology researcher from the Department of Radiation Oncology at the Medical University of South Carolina, USA, and is renowned yoga research specializing in breathing exercises. He is the founder and CEO of Prana Science Institute and the yoga specialist at the MUSC Health and Wellness Institute. Sundar's yoga research provided evidence linking salivary biomarkers and yogic breathing, so like pranayama breath. He studies how breathing practices could promote well-being in health and disease. His current studies include testing a yogic breathing app for cancer survivorship, employee wellness, and aging. Sundar is definitely a heavy hitter in this field. His TEDx talk about breathing has over 1 million views, and he's the author of 4 books and many other resources around breathing. Breathing practices are an ancient tradition with obvious health benefits, but it's clear that we don't fully understand yet why these breathing exercises have such amazing benefits for the health of body and mind, and how they can also help us in sport performance as well. And these two are doing a lot of research to improve our knowledge in those areas, and that research is really exciting. If you're at all interested in this, we've included a bunch of links to scientific papers, TED Talks, and other resources on the subject of breathing. All right. Thanks for listening. Definitely check out our new course, and I really hope you enjoy this episode. Hi, Sundar and Mike. Good to have you here.
Hi, Hazel. Thanks very much.
All right. So you're both experts in breathing from 2 slightly different fields. I think it would be just great. Maybe we can start with Sundar. Maybe you can give us like a sense of kind of like what attracted you to start studying breathing, and like more specifically these like traditional breathing techniques.
Yeah, I grew up in a family that practiced traditional healing practices that is called the Siddha medicine. So Siddha medicine is the part of the medical system from the southernmost part of India. Right now, it's in the Tamil language. So I grew up in that family background, had the opportunity to interact and learn from wonderful people in the family. And breathing is always one of the common themes within the yoga tradition, and also in the singing practices, chanting practices. So I was deeply involved in that. And later I was interested in studying literature related to the breathing exercises, the pranayamas specifically. And that's where I was drawn to studying Tirumantram, which is one of the ancient literature. Tirumular, the person who wrote Tirumantram, was a contemporary to Saint Patanjali in the yoga tradition. So when I was studying his texts, I was kind of pulled into it. And that's the time I was doing my research at the time, and then kind of connected both of them. So I would say that it is the passion for language. That's what is one thing. And then the passion and the opportunity to be in the tradition, in the family background. That's another thing. So, and then of course, your self-awareness of everything that is around you. And you just turn yourself into your breathing. That's what happened, your own experience, and how you realize those changes and reconnect that with whatever tools that you have outside.
Nice, cool. And so what frameworks have you studied it through? Because I think you've studied it through language, but also biology as well. You're a cell biologist.
Yes. So I'm basically biochemist. I got my PhD in biochemistry, and I am interested in looking at different signaling pathways inside the cells. So how molecules interact within the cell, and what is the outcome for the cell's survival or cell death? What is the effect of that signaling pathway? So right now I had experience studying heart cells, how cardiac myocytes, how they under stress enlarge in their size. So how their cytoskeletal, the cellular structure kind of rearranges to make a bigger heart during hypertrophy. So in climbing or in the high altitude, that's one of the things that happens. Like in high altitude, the heart cells undergo hypertrophy. So we study how that remodeling process happens, or rearrangement happens. Then later I study the bone cells, how bone cells resorb bone, some of the osteoclasts, how the osteoclast resorption happens. And then also studied how the fibroblasts would secrete different types of materials like collagen, the other extracellular matrix materials. And that's what is kind of started to understand different types of cell structures and functions, and then later studied cancer cells and how they are kind of affected with the cigarette smoke and the different components from the electronic cigarette and so on. So I have a very keen interest in studying different impact of external stressors on cells and their ability with it as a single cells, and also as an organization as a tissue, and then how that translates into the function of the whole being.
Right. Wow. It sounds like you've studied a lot of things. I thought you were like an expert on breathing, but it sounds like you're an expert on everything.
I jump around a lot.
Right. Okay. And Mike, tell us a little bit about your career and what's really interesting for you related to breathing.
Yeah, sure. So I came at it from a slightly different way from Sundar. I didn't grow up in a family with any knowledge of yogic tradition or anything like that. So, but I, as a child, was always meditating and doing different breath practices. I just didn't know what they were. So it just started spontaneously as a very young person. And that continued on. And then I kind of stopped doing it when I was maybe 14 or 15 for a couple of years. And then I started actually reading a bit about pranayama and beginning a practice at about 17, 18, which continued to evolve over time. And then I had actually a quite bad free solo accident in my mid 20s and nearly died kind of thing. I was in ICU and pretty smashed up, and yoga and pranayama were absolutely cornerstones for my recovery. And that's when I really delved into both quite a lot more deeply than I had been in the past. So I had a pre-existing interest from that initially. And when I went back to do my master's degree, I was not intending to work on the breath at all. In fact, I was in a computer science program studying artificial intelligence. And then I just made a switch into neuroscience just because I wanted to be in the same city, essentially. But the project itself sort of led into this. I mean, it was just a lucky happening that I ended up studying a tiny little area that happens to be involved in both the breathing and the attentional system, called the locus coeruleus in the center. Like, it's in the brainstem. It's a tiny little area. It's only 20,000 neurons out of billions, obviously, but it's got really important attentional functions, and it also has really important respiratory functions. And so my research is kind of centered around showing how the breath and the attentional state, or the conscious awareness, is oscillating together. They kind of track each other. And so I've been able to show that through, EEG and fMRI and some pupillometry measures, because the pupils are actually really good proxy measures for noradrenaline, which is what the locus coeruleus uses. So yeah, that's where I'm looking at it from, sort of, is trying to understand how the fluctuations in the two systems are interrelated. And they do seem to be, like, quite literally.
Right. And is that when we voluntarily put our attention on our breathing, or is it just that there's a spike in attention that correlates with the breath?
Yeah, it's a natural, both for sure, but there's a natural underlying attentional cycle that happens with every breath. And it's not a really profound thing, like your mind's not going up and down, but essentially every single time you breathe, more or less noradrenaline is being released from the locus coeruleus, because it actually is sensitive to the carbon dioxide content in the blood. And over the course of a breath, the carbon dioxide level is fluctuating in the entire body, but also in the brainstem. So the locus coeruleus, I think, is responding to that and increasing and decreasing the noradrenaline in the brain. And noradrenaline is essentially, you can look at it like, it's almost like adrenaline is to the body. Basically, it's a gas pedal for cortical activation, to really oversimplify it. But more noradrenaline and your brain starts firing more, and it'll push you into an state of anxiety or panic, essentially, and too little noradrenaline, and you're feeling sluggish and tired and unfocused. And in fact, during certain phases of sleep, the locus coeruleus becomes completely silent, and you also go into apneas during these sleep states, which is quite interesting. I'd love to look at that as well, but that'd be far in the future. So yeah, and also obviously as well, if you are intentionally focusing your mind on your breathing cycle, then you're going to be having that element of control in the attentional state. And I think that's why traditional Vipassana style type or shamatha style practices have used the breath as the object of focus, because it's the driving force behind the attention.
Yeah. I mean, there's something quite special about the breath in the body, right? Because it happens without attentional voluntary control, but then we can also control it as well. And it seems like there aren't other functions that have that sort of dual effect. Is that right? Is it or other ones? I mean, I guess obviously things like blinking of the eyes happen, certain things like that, but there's something fairly special about the breath, right?
I think so. Sundar might know more about this because he has a lot more knowledge about traditional yogic practice, but apparently some advanced yogis can achieve voluntary control over other systems in the body. I'm not too familiar with examples of that, though.
Some of the things that even with slowly, how you will be moving from the phases of the physical regulation, and then the regulation of the breath, then the mind control, then you approach a state of the wisdom layer, and then the bliss layer. That's what the 5 layers of our existence they talk about. And most of the time when we are moving into that state of, when we kind of start with the deeper breathing, we voluntarily control the breathing, and to a certain level, when we are sitting down and then doing the meditation, our breathing rate itself stops. Stops in the sense like it is slowing down further and further. And there are some Siddha traditional methods to keep your awareness in different places of our body. So that is where you connect your breathing with that specific spot within the body. Say it can be the top of the head or the eyebrows, center of the eyebrows, and things like that. So this is where I'm thinking that this is where the awareness, complete awareness of the breathing, when it is shifted from the lower part of your body to those specific regions, it is kind of creating a separate or different state of consciousness. So when Mike was talking about how the locus coeruleus is responding to different types of breathing changes, right? And I'm sure that Mike's, there are some preclinical studies that Mike is aware of, Kevin Yackel's paper on how those specific neurons, when they are abolished, they are able to slow down on the breathing. That improves different functions, attention, memory, and other cognitive functions in those mouse model. So that could be one of the ways that we can connect that how voluntary regulation of breathing can improve the higher order brain functions. Now, I'm more interested in how the olfactory bulb neurons are kind of connected to some of these structures. Some people, I'm not a neuroscientist, I'd love to learn a lot of things in neuroscience from you, Mike, how people are showing that it's associated with the specific, like maybe piriform cortex, those regions, how this is the olfactory bulb signal is one of the things constantly being watched by the brain, and based on that, it is changing its activity. So the 5 senses, the tradition talks about the mind is the master of 5 senses, and the 5 senses, even they are kind of, when the mind is not under our control, the 5 senses are let loose. And if one wants to control the mind, you cannot directly hold the mind, because there's no way the mind can control the mind, right? So the easiest way is to control the breathing. Breathing is the horse and mind is the rider. So you can easily approach the horse, that's the breathing, and that can control the mind. So this happens in many different ways. And the way that I see this, that voluntary regulation of breathing can move us from different phases of that 5 layer. So one of them is that because of the introspective experience, started looking at what's happening inside us and where do I kind of keep my awareness right now when I do the exercise. And this is where the mind kind of folds within itself and then go to a state of stillness. So this is where the amplifications of the mind is also reduced. So you don't have that. That's one of the ways that you lose energy, right? So the mental, stress or load on the mind is more when there is more amplification, when there is more outward journey. So when the mind folds within itself based on the breathing, then you have the ability to kind of bring that stillness that kind of keeps us at the here and now. And this is one of the ways in which even the 8-limb practice moves in that direction. People have shown at that stage, the heart rate goes down and your other metabolic functions, they're also slowing down. So there is no need for like a huge level of oxygen consumption at that point. And some of the exercises, they can even during the phases of getting ready with pranayama, during the learning phases of pranayama, you will just go into multiple extensive stages of carbon dioxide, whether elevated or even further reduced level of carbon dioxide. You have a broad range. So it's very interesting that how we can use some of these techniques in the learning phase and then go into a state of very lower metabolic state by slowing down on the heartbeat and things like that.
Cool. Yeah. How these techniques in pranayama, they're very old, right? And I imagine that when people formulated these techniques, they didn't know that there would be psychological and physiological health benefits. Like, how do those practices come to be? And why are we only just discovering their benefits now? I mean, I guess we're not discovering their benefits now. We're discovering the science underneath their benefits.
Yeah, for sure. Like the benefits have been known for an awful long time. Yeah, absolutely. What blows my mind is that people were able to figure all of this out without any physiological recording equipment. Basically, they made laboratories out of their own bodies and they became so good at observing their own physiology from within that they were able to see what was happening to their bodies with these. It blows my mind, to be honest.
Yeah, I guess it's just trial and error, right? And
it is also like the school of, the academy, right? It's a very thorough academy of lineage, I would say. So people, when they are not like, people in different loose structures, you will see if you take some of the Siddha tradition, you will see that who is the master of who and what is their lineage. You will be able to track it down. And the methods are, as Mike said, it's mainly because of their looking within. So how deeply they are aware of, like the Buddha is how he used breathing as a way of internal journey. So the same way in the Siddha tradition, they used different forms of metaphors. Sometimes they'll use the branches. Sometimes they will use different names for the branches. That's what I was thinking, that the Chandra Kalai, right? So the Kalai is basically a branch. They'll try to explain that how the different systems are branching out from the beginning, right? When the body is taking a shape, how different branches are produced and what is the function of this branch. And they will relate that sometimes to epics also, like this huge stories. So it's very interesting that sometimes they just say the story in a complete puzzle format. This is extremely, without any, the tools that we have may not be sufficient. Right? So that's how I see. There's one poem from Tirumandram that talks about the number of species on the earth, right? So this is 8.4 million species, right? So just that poem says, so he is the Saiva Siddhanta, It is related to Saiva Siddhanta. He says that God is in the form of 8.4 million species on the earth, and everything is the form of God. And even those who will not believe in that theory or believe in God, they themselves are part of that system, right? So that's what the poem goes. I was curious, like, how can they say? I can imagine that a saint saying, "Oh, don't kill, don't steal," all those things are good that they can say. But how can he enumerate something, right? So I went back to the literature, searched PubMed, how many species are there on the earth, right? So I was looking at it. There was a paper, it was published I think in 2010, in one of the PLOS journals, and they did used all the different bioinformatics methods to calculate this, and it was somewhere in that range, like a 7 point something plus or minus 1.2 million species, right? He didn't even give a standard deviation. It was like 8.4. Go figure it. So I was surprised by this number. So that made me to realize that it is not always necessary that these type of understanding of nature need not necessarily be solely dependent on the tools that we have right now. And it could be like we study in physics that the Kekulé discovered the structure of benzene by a dream, like how a snake was biting its own tail. So that's how he brought the ring structure to benzene, right? So in the same way, there are so many things that came out of meditation. So sometimes like our ideas like for some grand idea, experimental idea comes when we are in meditation.
Well, it's interesting because just earlier I think there's a bit of a delay. Just earlier this morning, I was doing a podcast with an expert on intuition, and he also gave the example of the guy coming up with the structure of benzene. But to be honest, I find that like less astonishing, because if you're studying something, you have all this information in the subconscious or the unconscious, and then something surfaces. But how did that guy come up with that number of species? I mean, is it the same process? I don't know. That seems pretty mad.
Yeah. So they probably sit on a meditation and then 8.4 appeared and then he wrote the poem.
Maybe it's the same guy. Maybe he achieved immortality and then now he did a paper to cover his own initial estimate.
Yeah. Very interesting, right? They say that.
Yeah. So I was just going to say, a lot of this is kind of East meets West, isn't it? Basically, it's these traditions, Eastern traditions, spiritual traditions that have been used for thousands of years. We've seen benefits, and then they travel to the West, and everyone's very, very skeptical and puts it to hocus pocus. And then now we're starting to study, I guess, because we have a more open mind around some of these traditional practices. We're starting to study them and we're seeing benefits. Meditation is probably the classic example, right? I guess, Sundar, like, what do you think is kind of, out of everything that you've studied to do with breathing in Eastern traditions, what do you think is that you've seen is most beneficial to psychology and health? What do you think people should know that would convince them that these practices are something that they should adopt in their daily lives?
Yeah, that's a great question. Just to clarify one thing, begin with that even though many different breathing exercises are popular in the East, the breathing regulation has been a practice in all over the world. Many cultures, like the African culture, Hawaiian culture, everyone had something to do with their breathing. So they all regulated breathing in some form. So that's the basic information. So the human race has been knowing the ways of our benefits of breathing, our breathing regulation. And in the East, it has been used for it's not necessarily for the medicinal purposes. It is mainly for the conscious purposes that they have used. And even now, one of the gurus that I know, he didn't like the fact that I was teaching these exercises to patients. When I was talking with him, like he said, no, you should not be teaching these to patients. I was contradicting him. But anyways, the important thing that based on my understanding, my practice, and the research that we have done so far is that when we change the breathing or regulate the breathing, there are so many things that are changing in our body. So I'm very much interested in something that can be very acute in terms of changes. That's where I followed salivary stimulation, because that is when the parasympathetic activation, when that happens, you stimulate salivation because of the opening of many different water channels within the body, especially in the mucosal system. So those water channels, when they are open, they just bring along many different biomolecules from within. It can be gaseous molecules like nitric oxide, very important. And then larger proteins like mucins, important molecules, immunoglobulins, it's key for our immune defense, and proteins like nerve growth factor. These are very kind of prominent molecules that we see being stimulated in saliva. And when I say saliva, that's the one that we tested. It can be produced because we know from the literature that some of the proteins that we found in saliva are also found in tears, breast milk, and in other body fluids as well. So it's very possible that this molecular makeup or molecular composition will be different in many different areas of our body, because it's not just compartmentalized. It's like it has it's a mixed system, right? So, for example, the nerve growth factor that we produce in the saliva can be transported to the central nervous system through the neurons themselves or to other parts of the body. The aerosol that we, kind of inhale can go to the lungs. So all these molecular changes and how that impacts different parts of the body or potentially can impact or improve the health is the thing that I see that captivates a lot of attention. And people can relate to their personal experience really well. Then if I teach some exercises or just to ask them to slow down on the breathing, it's I can feel the moisture in my eyes. Yes, I can remember that I do the salivation. I have experienced it. So when we connect those dots, like when you change the breathing, your salivation happens. And these are the chemicals that are in the saliva. And there are more than 1,000 different chemicals that we can study. And then that's where we are kind of bringing people, connecting. This is what is happening. And why nerve growth factor is important? Okay, probably you can reduce the Alzheimer's disease as you grow older, or you can get immunity, better immune functions, or better circulation, respiration, and so on. So those practices from the Siddha tradition, I found that through the research and then bringing it to people now. So we have a lot of different subsets of populations like cancer patients, aging, or scleroderma, many different conditions. We are using these techniques.
That's cool. And are there any specific breathing techniques where you see the most benefits?
I would say it is not, because we have different needs, right, at different times. Say, for example, in the morning on a cold day, I want to warm up my body. I may be doing a different breathing exercise. On a summer afternoon, I want to cool down my body. I may be doing a different exercise, right? So this is where the area is super open. We don't know, like even the book that I published with 37 pranayama exercises, I think I compiled a lot of different exercises from various traditions, and I modified several of them. And something like that came to me through my meditation. I put those exercises, some from the Siddha tradition, not yet known in the public world. So these are the exercises, but we need to know what exercise at what time what is it doing? for people with what condition, because that's everyone is different. And I am different from the morning. I'm different in the evening, right? So how these exercises are going to be stimulating various changes in people, that's something that I want to study in the future. But for now, I'm using a lot of slow breathing exercises based on the, kind of the stress reduction seems to be the common theme these days. And that is where I am using in many of our populations, we are using many of the slow breathing techniques, like the alternate nostril breathing or the breath hold with mild breath hold and so on.
Great. Yeah. I mean, I think slow belly breathing is probably the breathing technique that I use the most. And I think it's probably one of the more beneficial breathing techniques in climbing, because there's a tendency in climbing to be overly stressed. We're usually too alert. Some types of climbing you actually want to be kind of hyped up for, like short climbing with bursts of energy. And then I might speed up my breathing. But usually I'm scared, so I never slow down my breathing. Okay, so maybe this is a question for you, Mike, and maybe Sundar can jump in afterwards. But so I'm aware of kind of like some of the neuroscience around like why slow, deep belly breathing is relaxing. But there also seems to be something about actually just paying attention to the breath as well. So it's like there's these physiological changes when we just change our breathing, that correlate with a change in breathing. But there's also a psychological component, right, where when we observe our breathing, something also seems to change. And I personally find just watching my breath to be relaxing. But there's also, I don't know if bringing my attention to my breathing helps me be present and therefore manage anxiety, or whether bringing attention to my breathing helps me manage my breathing and not let it get too out of control. Do we know kind of like, whether it is physiological or psychological, or like how much is it one or the other, like what's the current research saying on that?
Yeah, I'm not sure that there is any really, like my own feeling, and I've thought about this a lot, and I kind of delve into it in a paper I wrote a little bit, but essentially they're not separate because the whole system is coupled, like synchronized in a structured anatomical way. And so anytime you affect one, either the breathing or the mind, it will have an influence on the other. So I think, maybe you can approach it two different ways, like physiologically by doing breathing exercises where you're doing breath control, I think. And then, there is a component of focus involved in that, but it's predominantly physiological. Whereas if you're practicing, like breath meditation with the sensations on your nostrils, that's a very challenging focus task, right? And so that's predominantly mental. But as Sundar mentioned before, when you do that practice, you definitely start to notice your breath slowing down, and mine personally becomes slower and shallower and slower and shallower until I'm barely breathing when I'm in a very deep meditation, and the attention isn't wandering at all. So they just seem to go together, whichever way you want to approach it, from bottom up or top down, I suppose. That'd be my guess. There could be research out there that I'm not aware of, but yeah.
Okay, yeah. And what have you, because I know you've done some research into the effects of meditation, right? Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I haven't actually studied. Well, no, that's not true. The most recent, it's an unpublished paper, and I can definitely discuss it. Yeah, we found some really neat stuff. I don't know if you know Wendy Hasenkamp. She's with the Mind Life Institute, the Dalai Lama's science, kind of Tibetan Buddhist science organization. And she had some old data from advanced meditators that she was kind enough to let me use. And so I got to look at it. And it's MRI data. So they're in the scanner having their brains imaged while they're not doing anything. They're just in a complete resting state. They were specifically told not to meditate, which is kind of like try not to think of an elephant. But they all claimed that they managed to do it successfully, to not refrain from meditating. And you can see in the MRI, what I did was look at the entire brain activity and essentially how it fluctuates over the course of a breath. It was a very complicated thing to do, but I managed to do it. And you see very specific areas, like there's sort of two attentional networks that flip-flop back and forth. You've probably heard of the default mode network, which is kind of just your mind wandering, sort of thinking random thoughts and repetitive thoughts. There's like a salience attentional network where you're focused and in the moment on a specific task and you're holding your attention in a certain place. And you see in these meditators, they're actually like oscillating between these two networks, but much less so than control participants who have very, very more exaggerated and more apparent like default mode network activity at a certain point in the breathing. And it's generally when they're beginning to inhale up to the top of their inhalation. I also looked at, she did another one, and I did something similar with that data, and they were told to meditate and press a button when when they noticed their mind wandering. And so I just looked at where in the breath they were coming to awareness of their mind having wandered. And it was far and away occurring for the meditators at the very beginning of exhalation. So there seems to be some kind of natural upswelling of the salience network and coming back to present awareness for this group anyway. For me, it's slightly different, but in their early exhalation. And the reason I even looked at that is because I noticed in my own meditation practice that I was always coming back to awareness at the beginning of an inhalation, just prior to it. That's what made me do that analysis. But I was a bit dejected to find out that these advanced meditators I don't know if I'm faster or slower. It could be like you're so far behind, you're ahead or something. Or my brain doesn't work apparently like theirs. So
how strong was the correlation?
Yeah, really strong. Like really strong. Yeah, I don't have the data, but it's really like they're all clustered around the same area of coming back to awareness. I mean, there's some variance, but it was remarkable.
And have they studied the same types of meditation, or have they been trained differently?
They're all different types of meditators, and they had varying lifetime hours of practice as well. I think it sort of ranged from just maybe a few hundred, and I'm estimating here, I can't remember the numbers, to like tens of thousands of hours.
So, I mean, what can we take away from that? Like, could we harness that and say, okay, well, that the start of the exhale is going to be a cue for me to come back to, back to my attention? I don't know.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I've been doing that in my meditation, trying to, I guess, bolster up the weaker parts of the respiratory curve. And that might just be part of the process of getting an unbroken awareness. I don't know. Like, those Zen archers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like with the big long bows, like part of their practice, and it's apparently quite secret knowledge, but there's a particular spot in the breath where they have to let go. It's not just any old, so...
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say on that, it's quite interesting because I teach fall practice to people. So Sundar, like in climbing, people are very afraid of falling, even though often it's actually safe to fall, because the rope catches you. And the way I teach it is you let go on the exhale. So you breathe out throughout the fall so that it's like this relaxing. You trigger that parasympathetic response at the same time as you're doing this thing that's supposed to be scary. So we use the exhale as a cue to let go. Yeah.
Exhale is also exhale is also a kind of an execution phase, right? So in martial arts, right, we have a kind of a staff rotating martial art. Like we see that part of that in the tennis also. Some of the players would be like, when they hit, they just exhale, like with a powerful exhalation. That is where the execution phase, whereas the inhalation seems to be the attention spas, kind of the phase where your attention is improving, right? In my practice, I kind of focus more into that awareness of distinguishing between the inhalation, exhalation, and where the cues start within your awareness, right? So where's the intention to breathe in starts? Where does the intention to exhale starts? And where does it spread? right? To different areas, like when you're just doing the slow breathing exercises, just focus inside and then see where the intention starts. It's the oropharynx, not nasopharyngeal areas, and how that is connected to the top, right? Maybe kind of how you're connecting the olfactory bulbs or different deeper regions. So it's very interesting that you can kind of get some awareness of the internal organs too, internal structures too, and how that is happening. That it happens mainly in the slow breathing area. You will be able to follow that mainly through the slow breathing exercises. That's what many of the diaphragm again is a very, very strong activator for the parasympathetic and the vagal nerve stimulation. So that's one of the things. It is not necessarily the blood gases that are determining what happens in a pranayama practice. It is the neural networks or the neural elements. Those are the ones that after a certain level, and the blood gases will have a very minor role, and the other ones like the neural networks take over. That's something that I always consider that it is it's very interesting. That's why they put that layer, like the physical layer and the breath layer, mind layer, and then the wisdom. That they always say that the pure wisdom is divine. Pure wisdom is the state that you want to achieve. And then some even go to that stage that the pure wisdom is, and pure wisdom and love, they are divine. So the love is nothing other than divinity. That's probably when you completely lose the self, right? You don't have any part that is, again, coming to maybe in the sports, like the yoga was what was part of the curriculum for the warriors in the older times, like in the archery, how they use breathing control, or in even the physical stability and posture. Everything is important in terms of how they keep themselves at war front. There's a saying that you may be in the war front, but your heart should be calm. You should have like very calm mind, but you are in the battlefield. So there is that happens mainly because of you are losing yourself, not in a bad way, but in a good way, that is you are moving from the awareness that I'm not this body, I'm not this breath, I'm not this mind, I'm not even this knowledge, right? So you lose every single thing, and it's just like a rocket falling, and then you reach that higher state. That's where probably that when you are not affected by falling, you will not be affected by, even during the stages, right? Sometimes certain things that when they happen in our life, that we don't take falling as a big risk, right? I can do that, right? Jumping from a tall structure into a river, that would not frighten us because of a prior experience, right? So what made us to decide to do that? Because we have lost that attachment of ourself on our life. So that attachment is the key. When we lose that attachment, then we will not be fearful. And that attachment is the breath. So you are storing all your attachment, the desire, the burdens, everything is stored in the breath. When you ease that out, that fear is lost. That's how.
Okay, there was a lot there. So the training in meditation is Vipassana, but I also, and I always say this wrong, Dzogchen, am I saying that right? Which is like a style of meditation where you observe that there's no self. Are you familiar with this? So like through Vipassana, you kind of, like just to tell the listeners, because I feel like we might be like a bit above most listeners' understanding of a lot of these concepts. But so through Vipassana, it's like concentration meditation, where you're watching your breath, which is Anapana, right? And then doing body scans. And the training is that you concentrate the mind, and then through bringing attention to throughout your body, you learn to not crave certain pleasant sensations in the body and also not crave certain unpleasant sensations in the body. And basically, you kind of like you give up all attachment and then you kind of lose your sense of self. And it's interesting because, like, when you think about flow state in sport, you also like lose this sense of self. And there's this, like, like in neuroscientific terms, I think they noticed that like the prefrontal cortex is like more quiet and down. And I guess we have that in meditation as well. But I guess what you were talking about, Sundar, is like maybe the more spiritual aspects of these practices, right? And when you talked about like your complete loss of the self, is that what we would probably commonly call enlightenment?
I would say that the samadhi, right? The state of samadhi. Sama is that equal. Adi is the beginning, right? So you're kind of going back to the place where you came from. So it is nothing other than nothing. So it is the place where, and the pranayama practice shows us the way, right? Where is yourself? Like we can think of, where do I find myself? Right? The Siddha tradition talks to you about the placement of it. So in the junction of ears, nose, eyes, and the mouth, all these four parts, the junction of all these parts, there is a principle in the form of light. And that light made this body. And that light is keeping this life force, right? That is the definition from one of the Thirumantram poem. So I try to see that, is that the eustachian tube, or is that the deeper part of the olfactory bulb area? Is that the combination of those? Which region is that? Is that somewhere close to my hippocampus, right? So it is where we keep our awareness. When we connect with the breathing, that is the place where we will be able to go back. I always consider that as my home. That is my personal home. Whenever I want to take rest, whenever I want to, feel myself, that's where I go back. So that is the spot or the region. That is where I can feel myself. And then what do I do with myself? Like I can realize that it is the kind of the combination of my mind, my determination, my kind of even the wisdom I'm collected and the collective consciousness of that I. So if we lose everything, that is where that life force will raise to, maybe to the samadhi status. That's how they see that you're losing all the senses, losing all the awareness of the self, and then move up. And pranayama seems to be the pathway for it.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because so the style of meditation that I'm currently practicing gets you to bring awareness to, because I feel like we have our sense of self is predominantly behind our face, right? Because we talk with our mouth and we see with our eyes. Like I feel like me more in my face than I do in my big toe. And so this meditation that I'm practicing gets you to kind of bring attention to that and then understand that all it is sensations. It's just a sensation in the mind and it's not myself at all. So it's quite interesting to hear what you're saying, where you're essentially saying that is where you feel your sense of self and that is powerful for you, that it's there. Yeah, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that.
Yeah, I've been doing like who's watching these thoughts lately and these sensations. And then I just keep fading back and back and back into this like silent witness kind of state. It doesn't really feel like it's anywhere, but I know what you mean about the self feeling like it's behind your face completely. I get that.
Because I guess like most kinds of meditation are getting you to understand some kind of non-dualism, right? This is the idea that like we are just our conscious experience. I don't know if we want to get too into that, but Yeah, I mean, we could go lots of avenues with this. I mean, maybe let's bring it back down to earth. Like, I don't know, Mike, how much do you think kind of the what there is in meditation is around awareness of one's consciousness and one's cognition, I suppose. You know, you talked about default mode network. I think like the key thing about the default mode network is that we don't know that we're in it, right? That we're just kind of like lost in thought. So, I mean, in your research, have you done much around kind of what benefits there are, especially if we're thinking about like the modern world and distractions and focus and that kind of thing, around having a meditation practice and then also breath work?
No, not at all. I think there are lots of people looking at that. Like, I'm more looking at underlying, like, I'm a meditator first, and I'm a climber first, and I'm a neuroscientist after, kind of, and that informed, they all inform each other, but they're all three are very related for me at this point as well. So yeah, I don't know. I don't really pay that much attention. I know that these practices are good for you, and I have gone through the literature at certain points, and so I'm aware there's lots of benefits from both breath work, you know, physiological benefits, cognitive benefits, emotional benefits, and the same goes for meditation. I mean, meditation in particular, like, there's been a whole gamut of studies showing improved brain activity and lateralization and synchronization and increased gray matter and white matter, even over the course of like incredibly short periods of meditation, right? So it does seem to help make healthy brains and bodies, both things. Yeah, but I don't have any specific examples of research, no.
So it's interesting though for me because you're a neuroscientist, right? You know, how much do you buy into like this more spiritual aspects of breathing and meditation? You know, the stuff that we don't have the literature for yet. Like, are you, you know, naturally skeptical around those things until you see evidence that it could be beneficial? Or do you kind of separate yourself out to be like, okay, this is the science, and then this is just me and my personal world? Because it seems like, you know, Sundar that is spiritual, and yet he's also a scientist, right? And we don't often find that. We often find scientists kind of, get away from me, spiritual stuff.
Yeah, no, I'd be the same, absolutely. Much to the chagrin of some people in my department, I'm sure. But yeah, I think consciousness and awareness are bigger than our brains or our bodies, obviously, and that ultimately we are just one single, right, conscious awareness existing. But yeah, it's not a question you can address scientifically, right? At least not with the tools we have, and probably never will be able to, and that's fine. But yeah, no, I'm not skeptical. I've done enough meditation and pranayama and yoga over the years to know that the benefits that they've claimed thus far in my practice have been completely shown to be true. And so I have no doubts about what they're saying about more advanced things as well. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes the the tools that we use to study those, right? And then sometimes the techniques or the methods that are being studied, they also kind of show that literature that the poor results of a study, right? So sometimes people think that, okay, the technique that I developed or the technique that my lineage developed is superior than the other one. Especially that happens in the recent times in the corporate type of world. Like, there are several gurus or practice methods that they try to promote their own brand. So those type of studies may be seen with more skepticism by the scholars. I think this has some. It's like the smoking studies done by cigarette companies, right? So this will be, they have to take that into account, and then the skepticism is part of that also, and the belief system, right? Once I believe in certain things, that there is a bias right away, right there, right? So that is also another possible, skepticism causing issue. But overall, the field is kind of moving in that direction. Lots and lots of studies are coming, especially from neuroscience, showing again and again that these are very valid, practices, and there'll be more research, of course, that will not, as you said, it will not be able to understand very easily.
Nice, great. All right, and then just finally, it'd be cool to hear from both of you. Like, you're both sort of experts in breathing and meditation, and what would you like people to know, or what do you think, like, how could climbers benefit from understanding more about their breath and awareness? Maybe Mike, you want to go first?
Yeah, this is the most fascinating part of it all for me, is that exactly. Yeah, I've got loads of ideas. I've had a real hard time since my free solo accident leading gear at my limit. And I never knew fear climbing before that accident. And so it's, I free soloed lots and all that. And it just I never got into that panic zone. I was always able to manage it. But afterwards, it was a real challenge. And I've found over the years, like, there are some little tricks that do help if I catch the fear, the anxiety state fast enough. Like, if I'm above my gear and I'm starting to get a bit sketched out, like, if I catch it right when I start to feel that, I can bring it back with the breath by focusing on the breathing and slowing the breathing down and just putting my entire awareness on the breath so that I'm not thinking about what's around me. I'm just breathing, calming down, the body's recovering slightly, and all of those sorts of things. If it does get past that state for me though, I have trouble using the breath to reel it in at that point. I'm usually just better off climbing through it and putting in another piece of gear or something and just dealing with the fear as a stimulus to move. Yeah, I've got other thoughts about, like, meditation in general. Obviously, is just going to, like, really focus your mind while you're on a climb. I've definitely seen that. And in every sport that I do, I've found meditation have really profound effects. I'm also really interested in things like breath of fire, Kapalbhati, like really rapid hyperoxygenating breathing that raises your blood oxygen level, right, for recovery in between, like, goes on a climb or something like that. I've been playing around with that. Yeah, kind of like Wim Hof, but you don't do the long exhale, because that really, like, that raises your CO2 and drops your oxygen levels to, like, I think, like 40-50% or something, depending how long you're holding, probably even further. I do Wim Hof, but it's for other reasons, not recovery. But it's just a theory of mine that hyperoxygenating your blood will probably help in lactate recovery, right? And changing the acidic level in your muscles that have gone into anaerobic. And probably if you do train your respiration and keep your blood oxygen high enough, you're going to extend that anaerobic threshold, right? So you're going to stay aerobic longer before you start to really pump out as well. But I have noticed in, like, bouldering sessions, and I'm not climbing hard or anything these days, I'm a couple days a week, few days a week, but, like, doing different breathings like that to hyperoxygenate does seem to shorten my recovery time and improve my performance on my next go. So, but this is all just my own experience. And I hope to study all this stuff at some point in a really structured way with, groups and control groups and stuff. But that
Specifically in climbing, or more generally? These studies, are you going to do them with climbers, or sort of just like...
Yeah, climbers. I hope to do it with climbers exclusively. Yeah, I really like your fall training. I think hey, have you ever come across, there's this researcher from Prague, Jiří Balas. Look, I'll send you the info. I'll send you some references, because this is really cool stuff. He did this experiment where he took climbers, I think they're experienced climbers, into a gym. And he split them into two groups. One group, he said, okay, lead this and clip every bolt. And he measured, like, adrenaline, noradrenaline, dopamine, serotonin, all these blood markers, right, before they set off. And then after they did their climb, and then the other group, he told to skip every other piece of protection and do the same lead. And man, you should see the biomarkers in these people, like their catecholamines and adrenaline spiked by like 800 to 1400%. It's just insane. Yeah, it's crazy. So I'll send it to you anyway. Like,
I did like a really, like, rudimentary study with this military group, because they had some quite good heart rate variability monitors, and we tracked it throughout the whole day, and we were doing full practice, and it was quite interesting seeing that spike, the stress response. And these are like these big tough guys, who like apparently don't get scared. And we're like, but it just says there that your stress levels are super high.
Were they special forces or?
Yeah.
Very nice. So I'm not a climber. I'm kind of adventurous. I go on hiking and jogging, maybe, right? So I do take a lot of risks in life. Like I have probably that my wife doesn't like me doing stuff that I do. So, which probably is like things like, how I'm able to kind of manage those things, maybe because I'm able to take care of my breathing. And I always make sure that in any sports that nasal breathing is very, very important part of your training. So there's also like mouth breathing is not directly kind of relating to probably your through the olfactory bulbs, and no, it's not kind of a major informational network that you're activating. And also like keeping the nasal breathing will help with our better cardiovascular functions. So that's overall. So I try to breathe even when I'm running. I just breathe only through my nose. So it's very, very.
I try to do it. But it's very hard. Sometimes I have to do in through the nose, out through the mouth. It's like a halfway house.
Yeah. So yeah, that's it's very kind of I kind of generate some rhythm when I'm running. So how many steps for inhalation, how many steps for exhalation, and then try to do that little longer exhalation by engaging the abdomen. Those are the things that I can train myself. And also in terms of anxiety in sports and in general is that one of the fears is that a fear of failing, right? So when we are able to get that detached from our mind, then that anxiety will not be developed to begin with. And when we don't have that anxiety, it is probably taking a lot of our energy away from that anxiety to a positive energy. Like our mind, because of the load, wherever that load is, that's where the energy moves away. So when we don't have that other side where we spend the energy, we can put them into a positive force. So that's where breathing could be an important training way. And yeah, it's I really like to see we have some programs that we have in the exercise groups. People will just go on for a 10-week weight management training, and before and after their workout period, we will teach them some exercises. So breathing exercises, so that they see that the breathing exercises help improve their performance, like maybe the cooling down or how they are able to be in that peak zone for longer time without much of a difficulty. Those are some of the things that we haven't collected data. It's not a research study, but this is like part of the wellness program. And we just, in our wellness institute, we have a system, DARI, DARI, the DARI system, which has like the 8 cameras, and it measures the range of motion and your, motion age, all the stuff, right? So it's fun. I was going through that today, and I was telling them that I'm going to do an 8-week straight flexibility program and then test it again. And this all mainly connected with the breathing. So how I can use some of the breathing exercises along with that to improve that flexibility and the hand grip strength. That there are some studies showing that hand grip strength can be improved by breathing exercises. That happens in the acute condition, the reaction time. Your reaction time is shortened with the breathing exercises. Those are very important in sports. So people, even before a game, doing some breathing exercises will help them to overcome that stress, anxiety. And then also during that becomes a second nature, right? So once you start working with your breathing, that becomes a second nature, that even during the event, you will not be stressed. You will have that stable mind. And that helps you to overcome many of the mistakes that we do is mainly because that we lose that mind. At that point, another problem comes, we tend to make mistakes. So the hand-head coordination, again, with the alternate nostril breathing exercise, the number of errors that a person makes in hand-head coordination reduces. So have a better coordination, better control the motor functions, and it definitely is a great thing for any sports.
Yeah, being relaxed is probably huge for climbing, because like there's such a tendency to overgrip and overwork when you're in a real stressful state. At least for me, there is, and I think for other climbers too. So being able to increase your relaxation on a route would probably be a really, really good thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most obvious place to start, really, isn't it? Like, say you're a climber and you don't really pay much attention to your breath. The place to start, I would say, is to start first, pay attention to your breathing more, and then second, when you're stressed, introduce slower breaths with longer exhale. I was interested by what you were saying though, Sundar, about hand grip, because this is very important for a climber. And if people knew that they could increase their hand grip strength with just some breathing exercises, they will definitely do it. So I don't know if we want to try and find that study and whatever breathing exercise they were doing to start doing it.
I can share that. A couple of people studied, TELUS is one of them, and there are other studies also. There was some reaction time studies again by TELUS, and recently there was a study by another group in India. They studied that reaction time with the NBAC tool, so visual reaction time, and there are some auditory reaction time studies too. So these are very important in how you react.
And what breathing exercise are they doing in those studies?
So mainly in alternate nostril breathing and slow breathing exercises. Slow abdominal breathing exercises, maybe 6 breaths or under per minute. So we tend to take like 12, 18 breaths per minute normally. Or sometimes if you're sitting on a computer, you probably breathe longer. But the slow breathing would be 6 breaths per minute or under, and the alternate nostril breathing exactly in the same pace.
Okay, and that's prior to the test, whatever it is, like right before it.
Yes,
okay.
Right before the test.
Interesting.
Right.
People could maybe do some experiments at home with fingerboarding.
This is also when they say balancing, right? So the alternate nostril breathing is a balancing exercise. I kind of developed this set of awareness places where you can follow your awareness of breathing, not just the nasal cycle to begin with, and then the olfactory bulb, the frontal sinus is inside, and the ear twitches. Everything that is on the upper respiratory tract, you just follow every single movement of your breathing. That completely takes off what's happening in the lower respiratory tract, even when you are doing. The only time that the attention drifts is that at extreme exhalation, when your tummy tucks in, then that's where the drift happens and you start the next inhalation. But most of the time it is revolving in this area, which is very, that's where probably that maybe the neuronal networks are much, much better and strengthened to improve their motor functions, maybe.
Interesting. Oh, cool. All right, guys, this has been really interesting. Is there anything else you think that would be useful for our listeners to know? I think we covered a lot of stuff, but...
Yeah, I would say, I always like to say this one, right? If you have anything to say to your mind, say it to your breath.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, I don't have anything nearly as profound, so I'll just
no.
I'll just agree with Sundar.
It was very nice talking with you. Nice talking with you, Hazel and Mike. Thank you so much. It was a great connection.
Yeah, no, great. Yeah, thanks so much, guys. Keep doing what you're doing.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Hazel.